Good afternoon and good morning to everyone that has joined us from overseas. I'm happy to say we've got another webinar today with our partners Navro, Payroll on the Edge, winning in a world of constant compliance change. And I know with a lot of you, compliance is one of those things that does keep people awake at night. Yeah, so I think every time we have a meeting, there's always compliance, compliance, compliance. So, okay then, so we have Johnny and Mike, so I'm going to pass it over to you guys. I'm going to come off camera.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar. My name is Johnny Nash, not Johnny Cash, the singer, I promise. Johnny Nash. And I'm based in the UK, Global Head of EOR Payroll and Pensions at Navro. And I'm here today with Mike. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mike Southgate. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer here at Navro, obviously working in payroll payments, and we're on the regulated side of the world. So as you can imagine, compliance is definitely our favourite subject. It's my favourite subject. I'm the compliance officer here, so you'd rather hope it was.
Awesome. And as Mel said, the key subject for today is winning in a world of constant compliance change. So just to quickly cover the agenda and what we're going to look to cover today. So first off, go through the compliance pressure cooker. So go through some key elements and key data points within that. The payment layer problem. So I always say payments is often the forgotten ugly duckling part of payroll that no one really considers on their vendor selections, as part of RFPs, as part of process submissions, but actually it's the most important part. Often say to most global payroll leaders, what's the first thing you report on? And they say accuracy of payroll or accuracy of payments, but they don't then control payments. So yeah, the payment layer problem, how to win, tactics, tech and team. So go through how the market is looking to support businesses in that compliance overhaul, and then also go through the Navro approach. But as Mel said, any questions you have, please feel free to put them in the chat. These webinars are always very, very difficult talking to a blank screen. So please feel free to ask any questions and we will pause and go through those throughout. And if Mike and I interrupt each other, I can't see Mike for some reason and he can't see me. So apologies for that. We'll try and stay consistent throughout. So first things first, the compliance pressure cooker. So just some data points here that we found really interesting upon doing the research here. So an over 5% year-on-year rise in global payroll complexity. This partnered with the amount of businesses that are now outsourcing payroll, but also with just overall changes in geopolitically in the world, really heightens the requirements for compliance, but also penalties are increasing year on year. Over 140 countries with digital payroll reporting rules. I've only been in the industry of payroll for the last 10 years, so both on the provider side, now on the actual payment side of a regulated business, and I've seen a huge amount of change. People will then say, 10 years in this industry, it's nothing. I've got 20, 30, 40. So I can only imagine the transformation that you guys have seen. But again, all of these digital payroll reporting rules is definitely a huge change. A stat that I find absolutely astounding is 1 to 8% of payroll spend is lost to errors annually, which is absolutely huge. When you put that into practice, especially when I always hear from businesses and payroll leaders is that the single biggest cost to a business is their payroll. I did learn one thing very nuanced and a bit off candor on this is I actually said that to a private jet building company, and they said, "Oh darling, not sure that you should be saying that to who we are." So not necessarily the good broad subject to bring up, but 1 to 8% is still huge. And we all talk about buzzwords in the industry of payroll. Validation, segregation, compliance are key, but often bank details are the forgotten part. There we have these concept of bank files, which is a static Excel document where data is inputted. So why don't we validate proactively bank details? Why does data sit there in systems like HR and payroll incorrect for us only to find out about those issues on payday? But we can come back to that. FTEs managing 6 to 12 jurisdictions, 3 to 5. And then obviously the 3 biggest risks here. So some complex elements to talk through. Just going over the 3 biggest risks. Worker classification is becoming huge, especially with the emergence of EOR, agent of record, AOR, AOR Pro, or there's so many different names that businesses are calling it now, but worker classification is becoming more and more important with penalties, fines we're hearing. Real-time reporting, again, huge. I think we're all moving to a world where real-time data, payments, everything is becoming the need. And that's driven by employees, right? On the back of COVID, we saw a huge change in the way that we as the world viewed life, really. And it became an employee-centric world for the first time in a number of years. And then cross-border payment regulation becoming much tougher with geopolitically with what's going on, tightened AML. But I definitely won't steal Mike's thunder on these when it comes to his slides later on. And then ultimately, so built for a world that no longer lasts. So back then, we kind of talk about historic processes, annual reviews, exception handling, end of month reconciliation, no real proactive nature, but also one-time checks over a vast period. So things that ultimately don't give you that real-time data visibility to help payroll become a strategic function. Again, one of the things that I've really enjoyed seeing over the last 10 years is how payroll has become more of a focus point for organizations. And I think that very much coincides with data visibility and how you have more access to data real time in more strategic ways. So as you said, you can now view everything in real time with cross-border complexity, viewing multiple jurisdictions in a single place. But also having compliance as a front of house risk tool. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so there's obviously a large number of things that impact payroll in terms of compliance, and compliance is a very broad church. It's often used, really interesting, London Tubes at the moment, there's a big advert for helping ease your compliance needs, and it's to do with information security and not compliance as we traditionally know it. But there's a humongous range of different areas where compliance can impact the payroll space. To give you an example, actually, in the regulated space, we recently received a notification from one of the FIUs, the financial investigators in the UK. And it was telling us all about the rise of the miniature umbrella company, which is a tax avoidance strategy whereby you employ a large number of people inside of a miniature umbrella company. The employer in that situation collects all of the tax for the year and then fails to ever remit it to HMRC. And so payroll, which was traditionally be seen as this lovely kind of clean, low risk space, is starting to attract criminality and a bunch of other issues. Also, as Johnny said, now compliance with things like purpose codes in different jurisdictions, particular payment logic and tax authority routing, which is changing in different jurisdictions. There's now requirements in payments world to validate beneficiary bank account details and to check the names of payers. And then also we've got real-time sanctions issues. So in the event that we try to pay individuals in certain jurisdictions, particularly sort of higher risk jurisdictions, think the Ukraine at the moment, there's obviously a requirement for us to conduct screening on those payments before they are sent. And for those firms who are working in a payroll space in an unregulated capacity, there's often a lot of sort of a lack of transparency of those obligations and requirements. And it can really catch you out if you're working with a sort of fairly generic provider, or even just with a regular bank who doesn't understand the nature of what you're doing. Those references and so forth that you send to an overseas tax authority could, to you, just look like a generic tax code and be fairly, benign. But for those people who, sort of screen those payments, it could also look like the dual use codes for some weird piece of technology that is actually used in an Iranian missile. And if you don't understand the context of payroll, that can cause you some real issues further down the line. Johnny, on to the next.
Just before you flip, my personal favorite line on this slide is actually this bottom one. So the cost of payment failure isn't just the fix, it's the audit trail, the remediation, the reputational hit. And I think that's really important. Is everyone, from what I understand, like I always kind of make businesses take 10 steps back when I talk about payroll payments. If you type in the definition of the word payroll, it's the calculating and paying of people and taxes. And if your provider does not offer that end-to-end service, they are not offering you an end-to-end payroll service. And I think the key is that kind of sentence is we've built things like bank files because we haven't really had technologies or systems or some of these elements that you can see here on this slide to really meet the requirements or meet the compliance requirements of the market. So if you buy domestic payroll in a lot of countries like US, Canada, UK, payments often come as very standard practices. But you move to the global scale and you get given an Excel and say, good luck, go and make your payments. And then people say, oh, a pound of payment's really expensive. Yet you've got an Excel document with someone's name, their salary, their bank details, and often other PII information like their address, manually flowing through different systems. So people saving it to their desktops, people saving that and forwarding it onto finance, GDPR problems, fraud problems, people in finance then loading this file into a bank system, hoping that the data is correct. But all of this is a totally reactive process because the bank hasn't got access to the data. So to Mike's point around like real-time sanctions, validation, nothing is real-time in the backdated way that we're doing payroll payments because everything is reactive through a file mechanism. So I wanted to really highlight the bottom point.
Sorry, Johnny, just to talk over you all there, by the way, there's two things that come to my mind with that. The first was the nearest I ever came to getting arrested, which was a fun story involving myself as an auditor for a payments company, where it turns out their payment files, this wasn't necessarily for payroll, but for all payments, was sent through to a compliance team who then sanction screened the payments quite manually. And I pointed out it was entirely possible to execute a payment by adding my own details to the bottom of that file. This was disputed by the payments team, so I added a small payment to myself to the bottom of their file for a penny, and the payment was duly executed. And they, rather than taking the feedback in the spirit with which it was intended, threatened to have me arrested under the Computer Misuse Act. So when trying to prove a point, be careful with how far you go. But there's a more interesting point here that Jane talks about sanction screening. The world's sanctions regimes are changing quite rapidly. And one of the things that we've noticed as a problem across the payroll space is people leaving validation of things such as sanction screening to the last minute. So with a standard provider, the way that sanction screening works is as the payment is made, it's checked against an international watch list to make sure that the person you're paying isn't a terrorist or a known drug dealer. The problem is that check is made at the point of payment rather than at the point of payroll kind of adding. You add the person's bank details. It is possible to validate that information there and then. And the problem that we see quite frequently is that come payday, Melanie unfortunately has a relatively common first name and has unfortunately been added as a sort of namesake to one of these lists. And what unfortunately happens is the payment is delayed or held up because we need additional information to clear out those alerts. More proactive providers, obviously hidden there for Navro, but we'll be screening those details on an ongoing basis. And so if that list changes on the 1st of the month, they should reach out to you immediately and say, hi, we need a little bit of extra information on Melanie before we get to payday. Start heading off some of those issues at the start. The issue there is that obviously, when you take the reputation hit, if Melanie doesn't get paid, she doesn't care why that delay was occurred, why that happened. Her mortgage company, credit card that she owes does not. I'm trying to work out how far I can go with that before it makes it sound like Melanie's massively in debt. But, Melanie obviously has payments that are due on that date. And therefore, if payroll is delayed, that's quite a hit for her and the relationship between her and her employer. So they are key timely payments. And unless you take actions to proactively manage that process, it can cause you some real issues.
And I think to add to Mike's point is our first reaction, just being emotive as human beings, is to think of people. we don't necessarily think about the impact of those authority payments that are late. Foreclosures, business foreclosures, fines, penalties, all sorts of other things that can then happen. I don't know anyone in the UK that's on this call who's had the pleasure of calling the HMRC because of payments being misallocated. But unfortunately, throughout my career, I've had to do that many a time, and it is the most painful process in the whole world. When funds get allocated to a holding account, you have to prove that this money should actually have been allocated correctly to this vendor. So we all just look at the net salaries, but the authority payments are often have less of a reputational damage directly on our employees, but have a huge amount of problems because of audits, remediations, the fines, the other things that you go through. So again, I think to really echo what Mike said, is it's a really broad problem amongst payroll payments, but also payroll payments aren't static. Payroll isn't static as a whole. Right, we see legislation, regulation change very often. So Turkey, for example, has just changed a regulation on how you have to pay employees. You now have to pay from a domestic owned, state-owned bank in Turkey. No longer can you pay from overseas. And amongst others, you've got the Middle East with the wage protection scheme adding a lot of complexity. You've got a lot of markets in Asia being very complex. You've got new instant rails that are being rolled out, but only have value dates of payments up to 25,000 or 2,500. So people have the luxury of earning 25,000. How do you make those payments if you're not considering it? So there's multiple points that you can really touch on, but I think this sentence really comes back to that first slide and set where we said 1 to 8% of the payroll value is potentially done in errors. It can really become important.
Johnny, just before you go, we do have a poll on that. Did you want to run it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Right.
I'm saying that, and Zoom have just changed the way that they're doing things, so bear with me. That's everyone since last week. Okay. So, have you experienced cross-border payment failure in the last 12 months? Yes, and it caused a significant issue. Yes, minor. We resolved it quickly. Not that we know of. We don't have visibility into this. So, what would surprise you with this one? I was going to say, what do you think is going to be the top one?
I hope it's not the answer. And I'm not sure, again, like who wants to be the one that puts their hand up and say me, but I would imagine it's not sure.
Yeah.
Does that sit within payroll? Does it sit within finance? It's that grey area, right? So that would be where I would put my money on. Mike?
I would also say that it's likely that they don't realise, because there is also a risk that employees aren't necessarily raising the issues and telling people that it's a problem, or they may not realise it's a problem. To give you an example, obviously, it's all fine and dandy you paying out with, say, the name of your payroll partner as the remitter name, and that then appears on the individual's bank account. They've been paid. Do they really care? No, they're absolutely fine that they've been paid. They've got what they want. And then they go to get a mortgage, and it turns out that actually the mortgage company says, well, hold on a minute, you've not been paid by, your employer, you've been paid by some third-party company. And it's only then that these issues surface. So I think actually a lot of times, surprisingly, it's possible for these issues to go unnoticed, or as Johnny said, for them to get lost in the cracks between different departments.
That's actually a really good point about mortgage, because that's the most stressful time of your life. And then, not being able to get it because there's a discrepancy. So that's a really good point. And we just, for those of you that haven't answered, if you could just, I have my number. We're not near the number yet, but we'll close the poll down shortly. So if you can answer, that would be fab. We're just going to keep it open for a couple of more seconds. So thank you, whoever that was, the two of you, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, oh, 3 of you now. Is it going to be more before I close it?
You worry there should have been a 5th option, which is it's been that bad, we're too embarrassed to talk about it.
Well, actually, do you know what I was going to say? If there was another comment, like if you did have a further comment, you can put it in the chat. So if there is something that we've missed out on any of these polls, feel free to add them in the chat. Anyway, listen, I'm going to stop the poll now. So thank you to the 4 extra people that answered for me. Okay, so I know you guys can't see it, can you? So I'll read it out. Yes, and it caused a significant issue, 6%. Yes, minor. We resolved it quickly, 28%. And this is the one, 56%, not that we know of. So I think you guys are right there. And then 11%, which I think is quite high, is we don't have visibility into this. Is that something that you see often, that they don't have visibility?
Yeah, all the time. I think it's one of the biggest things that we see is, as I said, I always call payments the ugly duckling of payroll, because it doesn't really have a place, right? It kind of doesn't sit. HR own the data, payroll executes the data and does the calculations, then finance control the cash. So it kind of sits in this horrible in between phase between all three, but no one wants to put their hand up and say, yeah, that's all me. So it's so often that part that no one wants to do. Like I always say, did anyone become an accountant to manually pay tax every month? Like, not really. But also payroll don't really want to be doing that either. So it kind of just fits in. So it definitely is in line with what we see. Mike, anything you want to add?
No, it's very similar. What I will say is when you consider that 6% of people have had a major issue, that's actually still really high. And given the long-term impact, the problem, of course, being is you build up a great reputation with your employees, they work really, really well with you, and then the moment they don't get paid, all of that faith and everything else is lost. And so even though 6% is actually probably higher than I'd expected, but it's a relatively small number. The goodwill and everything that's burned in that is painful.
Yeah, I agree. Like, just take simple maths, right? 100 payments, 6% go wrong. It's huge. Like any payments company, any fintech that went to market and said, yeah, I've got 94% accuracy. It's a huge, huge problem. I know that that's not necessarily what it says. It doesn't say 6% of payments fail, but still, that is huge and worrying for sure. So anyway, moving on to how to win tactics, tech, and team. So here's some things that Navro supports, and Mike, feel free to just jump in over me wherever we see. But first thing is validate upstream. So as I said, we have new hire data, we have employee data in HR systems, payroll systems, days, weeks, months, often before employees are actually paid. So why aren't we doing anything with that data? Why aren't we utilizing the new technology in the world? So there's confirmation and verification of payee, where you can actually match the account name and the account number of a worker. So everyone calls me Johnny. My name is actually Jonathan, spelled O-N at the end as well. So yes,
I cannot imagine you as a Jonathan, by the way.
No, me neither. But it is spelled incorrectly on purpose, just to confuse you even more.
There is also an element to that as well of when Johnny really hates bank files. Now, Johnny hates bank files for a completely different reason than I do. It's because they're inefficient. They expose data privacy issues on our DPO. So actually, I quite hate that one. They're also incredibly limited in how much information they contain. If you include things like a date of birth, a nationality, a whole bunch of extra information that really just helps us clear out those payments and helps us validate employees, then we can do that upstream validation. Again, it prevents issues from occurring further downstream. Navro, when we built our API out, I say we as if I'm a developer, I'm really not, but it was built with the intention of creating a large amount of optional fields that could be added so that we can do some of that validation in the earlier stages before we get to payday. So that upstream validation really helps improve STP rates and so forth.
And I always think about the employee experience here. It's not a good experience if the day of payday your company comes to you and says, look, I need a mother's maiden name, I need a passport copy to rule you out of a compliance check when you had the data for 6 weeks. Why can't you do that proactively? Why don't we take payroll from a reactive monthly reporting cycle to a real-time data process like we just mentioned? So I think there's just loads of things you can do to bring data and bring automation upstream. Audit ready by default, really kind of self-explanatory one, but make sure you complete the whole process, fully auditable, all in one system, especially when you talk about outsourced payroll vendors. One of the big things they say is you have everything auditable. Well, again, for payments, if I'm an employee, I know I don't get paid, who do I call? Payroll. right? If payroll then doesn't have access to the bank accounts to do finance, payroll has to call finance, finance has to look in the bank often has to be called. Then it's that kind of Chinese whispers approach of messages being passed from one place to another. So how can we provide better data visibility and audit ready by default? Clear compliance ownership. Mike, I don't know if you want to talk about this one anymore.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, which we see with, particularly if you work with an unregulated partner, or if you work with a partner who utilizes a large number of downstream payment providers. It can sometimes be hard to work out who is actually holding a payment. And if you work with, for example, a bunch of agent of payer models overseas, or if you work with a large number of different partners who execute payments where it takes multiple steps, particularly for international payments to arrive, it can sometimes be very, very hard to work out who is actually responsible for the payment at the time it goes missing or gets lost. Or it can be hard to work out who is responsible for collecting the information, conducting the KYC, and so forth. We've worked with a number of other firms who have come to us from partners whereby it was actually their responsibility as the payroll provider to conduct the KYC and the due diligence and everything else on their clients. And it turns out they were inheriting quite a large anti-money laundering obligation that they didn't realize. The payment processor was reliant upon their due diligence, and contractually that meant if they didn't do it to the right standard, they would fundamentally be responsible, which is quite a burden to place on a sort of unregulated firm in this space. So it's good to know where your responsibilities and liabilities end, but also to know that once payments are actually being executed, who is responsible for them upstream, downstream, etc.
Agreed. And then scalable by design, new countries, businesses are going global more than ever. So how can we make repeatable processes allowing businesses to scale and grow overseas quicker? Some key points to take back to your team today. I'm not going to read these through, definitely can take these away, but process a full reconciled audit trail of 24 hours for any jurisdiction. Well, this is actually one of my biggest bugbears is most traditional payment systems, including banks and other fintechs, give you completed, failed, or in progress for payments. And then the employee says, I haven't got my money, but in the bank account or in the system or whatever, and then it says payments completed. Well, it's clearly not, because the employee is still kicking and screaming and saying, where the hell is my money? Right? Like, imagine how frustrating that must be to a worker, right? We know that people are living paycheck to paycheck more than ever now. So that message doesn't quite cut it. So how, again, do you provide that better visibility, better audit trails, better centralization of all of these data points? Local validation we've touched on, worker classification we've touched on, really important. Again, can also be important for the purpose code used in payments. So payments and purpose codes and local clearing routes and instant rails are becoming more readily available. And purpose codes are becoming part of particularly those local clearing routes. So ensuring you have the right purpose code for the payment is absolutely key. Clear contractual compliance ownership with every payment vendor in your chain, really important. The amount of times that I pull Mike onto conversations and say, look, these guys aren't regulated, or they're using non-regulated suppliers and things like that. It's absolutely critical to protect yourselves, protect your cash and so on. But Mike, I don't know if you want to go deeper on that point.
Yeah, I weirdly, the analogy I'd use is if you hire a main builder versus if you try and subcontract everything out yourself. It is cheaper sometimes to subcontract out plumbing works, electrical works, and everything else. But fundamentally, you're then responsible for linking those things together and making sure that tradespeople arrive at the right time. Whereas if you can work with one clear contractual provider who maintains ownership of that process from end to end, that's really useful. If we then take that tortured analogy and make it about payroll, and we look at stat and tax payments versus nets, the last thing you want is to find that you've worked with a provider who can only do net payments to staff, but you've still got to make your own arrangements to do stat and tax payments in jurisdiction. Both models are completely acceptable, but what you need to understand when you're looking for a partner is just, do they have the capability to do the full process end to end, or am I going to have to find another partner to do certain elements of that process myself. As I said, both models are valid. You just need to make sure that you understand what you're actually getting as part of your contract.
Agreed. And then the bottom one is your payroll team notified automatically when a jurisdiction introduces a new reporting mandate. So for those of you that use external kind of parties or third-party vendors or however you want to call it, or outsourced payroll organizations, I really hope you do, because I would imagine this is the blueprint of what they offer. But for those of you that do, how do you pull that data? Where do you pull that data? And more specifically about payments. So again, Turkey, I gave a really good example. Those of you that run payroll in Australia, superannuation's gone from a quarterly payment to monthly. The France changed the way you have to deliver tax payments, and you get a 0.2% penalty if you pay via SEPA or a wire transfer versus a direct debit. And there's also other markets like Spain where you only have 3 participating banks that can actually pay withholding tax. So there's loads of complexity, and it's deep knowledge about how you do that. But we're in a constantly evolving world. So Ireland introducing a mandatory pension scheme that, again, matches very similarly to the UK and how it has to be paid via direct debit. No requirement to have a local bank account there, though, for payroll compliance. So how do you navigate that? How does that work? All of those kind of key elements really come to the forefront. Moving on to the Navra approach, and I got very much told to read this this sentence here. So, not a generic payments API with payroll use case bolted on. A platform designed from day one around paying employees, contractors, and statutory authorities accurately, on time, and everywhere. So, I think this is a really important point, is particularly with Navro, we are a purpose-built payroll EOR contractor payments business. We are not an invoice supplier. We're not a supplier invoice FX business that has said that they can do payroll. We do not treat payroll payments like an invoice. They are very different things. They have compliance complications, there are regulations, there's legislation, there's reference requirements, there's banking routing requirements. There's all sorts of things that have to be considered. And this is really where we stand out, is we have the broadest payroll payment coverage around tax and stat in the market. And we truly understand how payments have to be routed and cleared. So if you come to us and say, how do you do tax payments, social security in Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland, we can explain exactly how you do those compliantly. And we have built the network and the banking infrastructure underneath the hood of Navro to really support and cater for that. And we'll go into a bit more around how we do that in a moment, but I just wanted to pause for our next poll because I know that I've forgotten those and there's a few to go through. So Mel, if we can go to one of the polls.
I was just thinking, should we do poll 1? Because it'd be quite interesting. Oh, sorry, poll 4. There we go. Okay, how confident are you that you could produce a full payment audit trail within 24 hours if a regulator asked? So very confident we have this in place, somewhat confident it would take some effort, not confident it would be a scramble. I like that word, scramble. We've never tested this. What do you guys think on this one?
Mike?
Yeah, I'm going to say this is one of those things that's never really been tested. I know people will have followed up when there's issues with payments, but I think people will be, bold enough to say that it'd be a scramble. But I suspect most people have never had this never had this tested.
I think audit for payroll is such a standard thing, right? For approvals, first-time approval, straight through processing rates, all sorts of things like that. So analytics has become huge, especially even since I've been in this industry for the last 10, 15 years. So I think it's very much in payroll processing or calculations, just not as much in the forefront for payments. Because again, I know I keep saying this, but I feel like it's the forgotten part of the piece that's a bit too much of an extension. So why do I need to know about that audit? I think it poses a really good question, is also how much, and a bit of a loaded question, is if I was to ask, how do you do end-to-end payment flows for each of your countries or for each of the payroll items per country, how would you do that? It's always a question that really customers find really difficult, because they might do a bank file for net salaries, but no authority payments are in there. their third-party vendor or outsourced organization, if they use one, might do some of the authority or the lodgements, but they don't do the payments. So they then often have to contract potentially accounting firms or local service providers to do the actual payments as well. So yeah, I think the audit piece payments would be low, but for payroll will be quite high.
Okay, so we're going to close the poll up, but if the 4 of the people that answered the poll at the last minute want to answer again now, can you do so? Because I'm just going to shut it down in a couple of seconds. Okay, right. So the answers are very confident, 33%. So that is the top one. Somewhat confident, it would take some effort, 31%. Not confident, it would be a scramble, 16%. And we've never tested this. Actually, 20%. That's sort of what, yeah, it's still high, isn't it? 20%, I feel.
For sure.
Oh, I didn't share the results. Apologies. Sorry, there's.
To be fair, I'm glad to see that sort of third of people are confident that they have that and they have it in place. It's actually, that is the piece that I find the most surprising, because obviously in most cases it's an afterthought until an issue occurs. So, you know, well done to the third of people that have actually managed to get there. You know, sorry, I often get caught swearing, and I was about to say get there in order, but I'm trying desperately not to, hence the twitch.
I think a lot of people swear in payroll, Mike, so I think it's okay.
Awesome. So yeah, just onto like the Navro approach. So the payments curation platform summary. So as I said, Navro is a purpose-built payroll payments business, which ultimately is underpinned by banks, wallet providers, and other things. So what we're really trying to do is provide a network of payment options to customers through a single API or tech layer. So we're seeing the emergence of new payment methods or payment models. Things like stablecoin, please don't boo me in the background if anyone does. Stablecoin emerging, things like wallet payouts, so M-Pesa having huge kind of growing massively in the market. Pix in Brazil doing a hell of a lot of cash. So Pix in Brazil, you can now actually pay authority payments to your taxes through Pix. I mean, M-Pesa, same. First 2 wallet providers to allow tax or withholding tax payments to go through a wallet scheme. So again, we're seeing the emergence of this really happen. When I was first in this industry, we were still talking about checks outside of the US as well. So I'm glad that that's kind of slowly moving away and we're moving to more digital options, but still there. But what we wanted to talk about in particular is what we do differently. So is that embedded validation. So giving your employee experience the most important, giving your employees the best experience possible, increasing accuracy, straight through processing, and ensuring everyone is paid on pay date. Sounds pretty self-explanatory, but ultimately it's the most important function, is to make sure that everyone is calculated and paid correctly on pay date. The global coverage with local logic, ultimately again providing that global infrastructure, but also understanding the individual country nuances that come with payroll payments and staying ahead of those. White glove migration data, audits, data elements, everything here, but white glove treatment in payroll is absolutely key, because again, most important part of payroll is the people and how we make that work. I'll leave compliance first and let Mike talk to that in a second. Audit ready by design. Again, how do you have visibility into the end-to-end process, and then fewer failures and less rework, as we said. Is again going back to that bank file concept. You got incorrect data in a bank file, the whole bank file is rejected. It's not one line, it's the whole bank file. You then have to rip that file apart, take that one worker out or one line out, and then people say, oh, it's only one line. But do you really want to be doing that? Do you want to be amending files with that much employee data and this much sensitivity around it? I personally wouldn't want to do that. But also in some countries, or some like the UK, where you've got an account number 8 digits long, if you open a CSV, you lose all your leading zeros. I wouldn't want to be taking a punt on adding those zeros back in. I know it's 8 digits, quite self-explanatory, but still, I still wouldn't want to be doing that and taking that risk. But Mike, anything you want to add on the compliance first, or anything else I've missed?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting. There's a question in the Q&A about validation, and in terms of compliance, one of the things that you can do is think of confirmation of payer or validation of payer, depending on which country you're in. So for those of you who are in the UK, when you go to set up a payment and you had a new beneficiary in your bank, and it says, oh, you're actually, you think you're paying Johnny Nash, but actually it turns out you're paying Johnny Cash, and he sings better, but he really shouldn't get paid by you. And in terms of the question there as to whether payroll teams should be expected to understand that, or if it's the payroll provider's job, payments provider's job, let's be clear, you as an employer are liable for making sure that you pay your employees. Johnny Nash / Johnny Cash doesn't care whether I sent the payment to the wrong bank account. You as the employer are legally required to pay your employees. So if for whatever reason your payment file has been corrupted or a fraudster has added their own details into that payment, you as a payment team or a payroll team are expected to understand that and are expected to do something about that. And if you don't, then your liability is the entire salary that you should have paid that person and then failed to do. So one of the key things that Navro built in right from the start is those confirmation and verification of payee tools. Now, most UK banks will let you do that in the UK. Navro will allow you to do that in the UK, across Europe. We also have access to do that in about 110 different countries. So we can tell you the name of the account that you're paying to. As we said earlier, we can also do the verification of those names against sanctions lists and so forth to make sure that you're not paying an individual that could be potentially sanctioned, which if you're employing remote workers, especially under EOR models, can be a real risk. But the key difference is we built those tools to work in real time and live to reflect the fact that we have live real time payouts as opposed to bolting everything on at the end.
And I think, again, we've kind of done what everyone does when it comes to payments, is talk about employee payments. Authorities are just as key. How do I validate that I've got the reference in the right requirement and the right character length in the right format? So what's the format requirements for delivering a tax payment in France or in Spain? What is the reference requirement? And does my system or does my bank use smart routing or have any infrastructure built to control what I give? So if the reference requirement's 10 digits in a certain format, why aren't systems configured to only consume data in that way? So again, we talk about beneficiaries and employee data, so like an IBAN being a particular length, but why can't we do that on references? And again, this is some things that Navro is doing, is we know the specific reference requirements to deliver tax payments in Germany and Spain and Italy and so on. So that's all built into our platform. So when it goes to log a statutory payment or a tax payment or a social contribution payment, and if you give us the incorrect reference, we'll say, like, look, we believe that this should be 10 digits following these format requirements. So again, we always lean towards the human nature of payroll and the payroll payments for the workers. But ultimately, the taxes are the complex part, and that's really where we can support. It's not about just moving money from one place to another. There's all sorts of things you have to take into consideration. What bank, how you route the payment, what payment method, what are the downstream impacts, and how does that beneficiary bank then allocate the cash? But also, what are the reference requirements for routing those payments? Coming to the end, and 3 things to take away. The compliance pressure is structural. It will keep growing. Your operating model needs to be built for it. So just recapping what we said, ensuring you can really operate on that real-time nature, ensuring that compliance is at the forefront of everything we do. We talk about compliance so much in payroll. So how can you use tools and embed tools within your infrastructure to ensure we're doing these things well? Payment layer is your biggest blind spot. Visibility and control over what happens after handoffs is non-negotiable. Again, going back to that reporting piece that I said, how can you honestly report on an accurate payroll if you don't have line of sight of the payment process? And then you don't have to solve this alone. Purpose-built infrastructure exists, and free audit is one click away. I couldn't agree with this one more. We're in a world where businesses are doing a lot of different things and are expanding their services. Navro is a purpose-built technology that solves one thing and does it very, very well. And we want to continue down that path and go deep and wide. So yeah, please feel free to reach out, drop any messages, drop any questions in the chat, anything like that you have on how we can improve, or any gaps or issues that you guys are seeing, because again, we want to serve the market as a whole, and we want to make the payroll experience broadly better. And I think that's the key, is payments to payroll is like payslip to payroll. They're an absolutely must have. Who does that and where it's generated, where it's put is obviously just a question. But I always say that payment is an absolute must have within the payroll process. Otherwise, people will be pretty unhappy. And I think that is it.
Okay. We do have some questions. We do actually have a statement. The CSV file losing zeros, and when producing reports by banks, other managers thought I was incompetent by producing those reports, but I did not want to tamper with the data. It was tough to explain this, but the PDFs were accurate.
We have seen that a lot, and the really interesting thing is that we often find it's an innocuous mistake. People, and they want to do the right thing. What happens is the file gets sent to them and they think, oh, I'll just open it up and check the data. And the file comes to them as a CSV, and they fail to realize that when they open it up, it's a physics experiment. Observing it changes the data. The other thing that you get is it adds commas. It sometimes turns everything into a random string starting with a Q. I think really obscure things. It messes with dates. My condolences to the person who thought that, whose managers thought that they were incompetent. It's an absolute nightmare. But you have to download the file, look at it, and then send the original. Otherwise, it can sometimes cause real issues.
Mike mentioned it earlier. I have an absolute hatred in this market for bank files, because I think conceptually they're the most broken processes in the world. It is a file with someone's most sensitive PII. It is your salary information, so your net pay, your bank details, your first and last name, and often other information like PII, sent via a CSV and Excel, right? We've spent years in payroll working on integrations from HR systems into payroll to reduce that manual transfer of data, to reduce risk, reduce fraud risk, reduce all of these elements, and create segregation of duties and all of those wonderful things. Yet a bank file fundamentally is a static Excel document that has all of that employee data that people often have to download from a system or a technology onto their desktop, send to finance, and go through it. It is conceptually the most backwards process I've ever seen. And I always say, go ask your team in audit, ask your compliance team to jump on a call and explain the bank file process. They will never sign that process off. Again,
Johnny, sorry, weird enough, I'm looking at the questions here, and somebody said, I want to do a quick sense check about current. Sorry, I'm stealing Melanie's job here.
And I go for it.
I wanted to do a quick sense check of our current payment setup. Where would I even start? Is there a simple way to know if we're exposed? Interestingly enough, so there's this exercise that you do in regulated world, called digital operational resilience. And inside of that, what you have to do is map your entire process from start to finish. So you literally look at, how does Navro onboard customers? What systems do we use? What tools do we use? How do staff interact with that process? So you would take your entire process from end to end with regards to payroll. How do I onboard a staff member? How do I get their payments data? How do I then get that payments data to another provider? And once you've mapped that whole thing, you can start to look in that system. So one that Johnny keeps mentioning there is the payment files. Who has access to those? Where do they go? Why do we even have them? Like, if they're emailed on a regular basis, that's a real problem. So what you do is you map your entire process from end to end, and you look at where the risks could occur. And the risks could occur with a large amount of human interaction, with manual changes to things. You may find during that process that you discover that one of your payments vendors is actually just an agent of payer model, and they're not regulated or licensed, and you're sending money to them on the basis they will do an onward payment, but you don't realize that they're not regulated, or that you've got no protections. So the starting point for me would be to just map the whole process from start to finish, analyze it kind of from a risk perspective, and see where you might have gaps and issues. And if there's anything that once you discover it really keeps you awake at night, it was cool.
And I just to really echo what Mike says is make sure you include authorities. everyone's first stop is the or bank file with is net salaries. Net salaries, a bank file never includes authority payments. So your taxes, social contributions, your non-statutory benefit payments, your health insurance, pensions, meal vouchers, whatever it may be. When you go through that mapping exercise, make sure you look at the payroll objectively and say, okay, here are all of the contributions I have to pay month on month, quarter on quarter, bi-weekly period, whatever that pay period may look like, and really understand that data flow. Because often the case with authority payments is, here's the tax amount, good luck, go and pay it. There's no bank file. It's someone has to manually take a document or manually take a data element and manually upload that or key that into a banking infrastructure. And again, to Mike's point, where does that open you up in terms of risk, fraud, segregation of duties, and so on? So when you go through that journey, exactly as Mike mentioned, really make sure you include all those payment elements.
We have one more question. You mentioned purpose codes and beneficiary validation. I'll be honest, I've never heard these terms in a payroll context before. Is this something payroll teams are expected to understand, or should it be the payments provider's job?
I think that was kind of what I was alluding to earlier when it comes to liability. Fundamentally, if you give a file to a payroll provider, they will contractually execute the payment exactly as you've told them to do so. And if it turns out you're not paying Johnny Nash, or if it turns out that you've got the payroll code wrong, they will just execute the payment as you have instructed them to do so, especially if it's a bank file. Like, no bank is ever going to get that bank file and go, hey guys, have you realized that you've messed this up and that's not actually a valid sort code? They're just going to reject the file and send it back to you, or they're just going to pay the person pretending to be Johnny Nash. So yeah, I think realistically that is something that people should be aware of, and they should be making sure that they're validating data before, because the risk if they fail to do that is quite high. Well,
I think
the loss is quite high.
Yeah, and to go to Mike's point as well, I think it also depends on how you're managing that payroll process, right? It's if you're using an outsourced vendor, can you outsource some of that risk to those outsourced vendors? If you're doing it more in-house, then yes, it definitely ultimately would lie on you, as that you are the payroll processing element in that scenario. So I think there's certain areas you can lean on different functions, but those are key. The purpose codes are key in the way you remit payments. Like in Singapore, if you don't pay via gyro, which is the local clearing method, the employees can lose their benefits. We have instant rails that improve payment timeframes, but they also don't carry the right purpose codes to allocate payments for salary, which means you lose those codes in some scenarios. So I think it depends in which scenario, but again, this is why purpose-built businesses and technologies like Navro exist, is we really want to lift the hood of how do we do these things at scale for businesses.
So one of the things that we're finding, which has been quite interesting over the last couple of years, we've had more and more inquiries from the members because they've celebrated the payroll run, and then all of a sudden their employees aren't getting paid because of the payment side. So it's definitely becoming more complex. It's definitely something, even last year, I would say every single week we would have a query from one of the members, or they'd be highlighting that they've got an issue on the payment side just because of the complexities. We do have a question, which is more of a Navro type question. What geographies do you cover?
The global is the answer from a marketing perspective. We've done a press release really recently around our authority payment coverage, where we can support over 95 countries for all payroll elements. So we break payroll payments into 4 buckets, which is net taxes, so withholding tax, other mandatory, so social contributions, health insurance, pensions in some markets, and then non-statutory third parties, so benefits in kind. So over 95 markets, we are growing that week on week. From a pure payments perspective, we can process in over 180 markets, I believe it is, Mike, right? But from a payroll payment perspective, which I think, again, very different things, where I can move money to versus where I can initiate and process payroll payments are different. And again, where we can deliver net salaries to versus tax and stat are very different. So we offer global payments, and if there's any questions on specific territories, countries, regions, we're absolutely here to support and help drill down further into what those countries may be.
Okay, and we got just time for just a short answer to this one. We already have a payment provider. Why switch to another one?
Ultimately, it's, do they offer the proactive validation that we've declared here? And it also depends. It's a really broad question to give a short answer to, because who is that payment? Is it a fintech? Is it a bank? Is it, what's kind of level of service are they doing? Are they offering you authority payments in all of your markets? Can they do your tax payments, your social security, your health insurance payments, and so on? So it's really like, it's a really difficult question. It's like saying, why would I use your payroll software over someone else's? There's
I mean,
lots of ways you can answer that question.
The honest answer though is, to be blunt, and I'm aware this is where our marketing team and our commercial teams would absolutely stab me. If it works, don't stick with where you are. However, make sure you've done that process of mapping everything out and making sure that you know who you're dealing with, making sure that they are properly regulated, making sure they've got all of the validation checks in place. And if you get through that entire process and everything there's good and there's no major security breaches and everything else, don't move. Because honestly, that uplift to move from one to another can be a real pain in the backside. But honestly, every single time we've said that to a firm and we've said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, they come back to us a week later and they go, we found the following 5 areas where it is actually broken. Can you please help? But if it ain't broke and you honestly look at the provider and it's all working out and they're all regulated and nothing's broken, actually don't. The last point on that though is you may find that cost fundamentally can be cheaper. One of the things that we found with competitors is that sometimes they require funding 3, 5, 7, 15 days in advance. So when you are looking at providers, just compare like for like, make sure that you're not finding that you could ease up 15 days worth of cash flow by paying later by using a different provider.
Well, I do have to say, I do love a bit of honesty. Honesty is the best policy, and I think our audience prefer that also. So I just want to say thank you so much, Johnny and Mike. I've really enjoyed it. I have to say, I've just literally got a message going, oh my God, I love Mike from Navro. So there you go.
You've only seen me for 58 minutes.
You've got a fan base, Mike. You've got a fan base. So for that person to want to stalk you, are you okay if they contact you on LinkedIn? Both of you, obviously Johnny as well, because you're the character of the payroll industry, I think, Johnny, aren't you? So if anybody isn't isn't connected with you, they can do that via LinkedIn. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Fab. And Mike, let us know if you get a new stalker from the payroll industry.
It's all right. I don't feel left out absolutely at all. I'm just going to be jobless after that. So thanks, everyone.
Johnny, I get it. It's a story of my life. The story of my life. I have to wave and say to people, I am here. I am here.
The worst thing is our chief marketing officer just joined as you said that as well. So yeah, perfect timing. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. Honestly, I really enjoyed today's webinar. It's really informative, really good information there. And for people in the payroll industry, really payments, you do need to look at it. It is becoming harder and harder. So thanks, everyone. And I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.